So if you played the God of War Valhalla DLC, you would have seen older Greek enemies brought to the newer engine, which creates a really compelling argument for a potential remake. Why would they go through all this effort for free DLC if they weren't planning on reusing it? Which is basically why I made this video, because if they are going to reuse it, that would be on the newer God of War 4 engine. The newer God of War games play way differently than the older ones. The older games weren't just appealing because of their combat, but also the platforming and the puzzles. Putting God of War 1 on the God of War 4 engine would be removing a lot of freedoms and interactivity. You don't really feel this way with the Norse games because that's the way they're meant to be. If you were to remake God of War 1 on this engine, it would be lackluster by comparison. Because the Greek and Norse games do different things. If you were to try and do a solo Kratos adventure without the platforming, it really wouldn't work. Because if you really think about it, you'd basically be removing all the underwater sections, all the jumping and platforming, unless you just spam the jump button. And then like the part in God of War 1 where you push the soldier up the rocks, that couldn't be replicated in the new engine because they tried with God of War Valhalla and it just didn't work. So it would leave the game feeling really flat and linear. And like I said, God of War 4 doesn't really feel this way because there's no reference, that's just what you have. If they are going to do a remake on this engine, there's a couple ways they can improve it. In Yakuza Kiwami 1, you have the Majima Everywhere system, which is a really great addition. Resident Evil 2 had Mr. X. So my point is, if you're going to add something, make it cooler. One improvement they could definitely do is the Medusa fight. The Medusa fight's not like terrible or anything, it does what it's supposed to, but you can make it a lot cooler if you were to remake the game. In the original game, they cut out a bird boss fight right before you get Pandora's box. Maybe they could bring that back. It would be really nice if they could improve the original game. Like imagine if in Shadow of the Colossus they added the Colossi that weren't used. Basically just add things that don't take away from the experience but add to it. Like a properly implemented New Game Plus mode. You kind of have this with the costumes, which I really like by the way. They definitely need to come back. But anyway, I'm going to talk about the advantages of doing this remake or remastered. The thing about this video is that I was going to get footage of God of War 1 or 2, or any of the PS3 games. Sony made it extremely difficult to play these games. I can play them on my PS3 or my Vita, but that's 2 generations behind. An advantage, even if they port it, is that more people will be able to play it, which is great. I really think you should play the original God of War games. So if you want to get into the series though, you have to pay Sony an exorbitant price, or buy a PS3 and all the games, or, and if you know what I'm talking about, deal with a lot of input delay. Now, a remaster is really only for people who played the original, like the game I grew up liking, looking better. People just won't play a game from 2005 because it doesn't have modern graphics, which is pretty lame, but it's what it is. Whatever they end up doing, a lot more people will have access to the game. The only problem is it might be an inferior version. The other thing I was going to bring up is the gameplay, like the combat. I think that God of War 4 has really good combat. I really like the way the axe feels, everything feels. And I think that the Blade of Olympus in Ragnarök was pretty cool. So that being said, something like the Blade of Artemis would be really cool in the God of War 4 engine. In the Rage of the Gods, where Kratos gets like the lightning Spartan armor, would be really cool looking. So if they were to do a remake, I think it'd be awesome, combat-wise, but flawed when it comes to like the jumping and the platforming and stuff. I think best case scenario, they port the older games to PC. It's really hard to go wrong with that. Anybody can play it, more people are interested in the series, and then you also make the remake. You definitely go that route and then you don't really lose. Now I'm going to get into the more concerning parts about this. This is going to be God of War's 20th anniversary in 2025. I think people's passion and outlook on things has changed since then, but especially the writing. There's a lot to get into it, but there's like a fire trap in God of War Valhalla. It's the same one that's in God of War 1 where you have to sacrifice the soldier by pushing him up. But Kratos actually ends up getting in the trap himself and like letting himself catch on fire. I know what you're trying to go with, like writing wise, like you're trying to show his improvement, but this is just stupid. If they're trying to insinuate that he should have sacrificed himself instead of the Greek soldier, like back in God of War 1, that's probably the worst writing ever. And if you say, well, that's not what they mean, it's like, okay, well, what does it have to do with Valhalla? Why is one of the tests to light yourself on fire? People who are not good at writing don't know what sacrifice is, trying to force it in. Like with Fallout 3, the ending, in the base game, you can't have your followers sacrifice themselves for you. You need the DLC for them to do it. And I said sacrifice, but like there's a guy named Fox who's a super mutant. He's immune to the radiation. He walks in and pushes a button. That's all that happens. Nobody has to die. But if you do that, the game calls you a coward. And people will call these people professional writers. Like, this doesn't make any sense. If one of you can explain it to me, go ahead. The other thing is this idea that Kratos was in the wrong in the Greek saga. In God of War 2, right before you fight the Kraken, right after you fight the last Spartan, Gaia explains to Kratos that he has to win. If he doesn't defeat Hades and Zeus, they're just going to torment him for all eternity. It's a lot more than vengeance bad, Kratos is bad. Kratos was defending himself from somebody who literally killed him already. In God of War 3, Kratos was meek even, because he offered to not fight Hercules. You can't think defeating your enemies is a bad thing. Like, the entire point is, Kratos didn't have a choice but to complete the saga. He had to do God of War 3. I don't understand why modern writers hate their protagonists. I don't think winning makes you evil. If people don't stop evil people, then they'll just continue what they're doing. Kratos had to win, he had to put an end to Zeus's reign. And I will always defend God of War 4. I have over 1,000 hours on that game. But God of War Ragnarok, I think, is really lame.
LeBron James, scream if you love God of War Ragnarok.
Like, it doesn't do anything. I don't have to tell you why it's lame, you have to tell me why it's cool. God of War Ragnarok is like if you removed the Poseidon, Hades, Hercules, and Kronos boss fights from God of War 3, and then you made the Hermes fight twice as long. And the combat is at like 0.5 speed. Like, Baldur is cooler than everybody in God of War Ragnarok combined. Like, they didn't even put Vidar, Thor's brother, in the game. He is a key character in the events of Ragnarok. He literally avenges Odin. He takes Odin's place after Ragnarok, and he's almost as strong as Thor physically. You can get his armor in the game, but he's not anywhere mentioned. Everything they did in the game is way worse than the actual Norse mythology. They made Norse mythology look bad compared to Greek mythology because they couldn't make a game properly. So if you want to refute this, just tell me what is cool about the game. Anything. Tell me one thing that is cool about the game. Like, for instance, they added really cool weapons, but there's nothing to use it against. Like, what are you going to use these weapons against? Are you gonna, like, juggle a Draugr or something? It is a worse game than God of War 4, which is so crazy because God of War 4 is setting everything up, and they had obvious limitations, but the thing is, it just overperforms compared to Ragnarok in every way. The reason I'm talking about all this is the essential revisionist history that they're gonna pull off. It's hard to play the original God of War 1, so if they were to make this remake, they would be retelling this story with a more modern lens, and basically doing whatever they want, and this will become the official and canon version of that game. So it is definitely worrisome. I thought Valhalla's ending was pretty lame too. Like, you fight Tyr a couple times and then you get to see your younger self. I think this is a pretty neat idea. I actually did this a year before they did.
They stole it from me, Carmine! They took it!
The idea of doppelgangers isn't new to the God of War series, but Kratos meeting his younger self is. He did in Ghost of Sparta, but I'm saying Norse Kratos meeting Greek Kratos hasn't happened yet. And the way Valhalla is set up is so funny to me because if you look at the most popular mods, all they did was implement them into the game, which a lot of credits go to the designers of the weapons and stuff, but it wasn't anything special from a story perspective. Kratos meeting his younger self isn't the bad part, it's the fact that you don't have a boss fight against him. Which is probably fine, because I'd prefer if you didn't fight him at the end of a tacked-on roguelike. But you know, a young Kratos, God of War 3 Kratos would be a fun boss fight. If I had control over that, I would absolutely make you fight him. But that's about it. I do want to hear your thoughts on the matter. I want to move away from model slops and towards commentary videos, so expect more videos like this. And I have a whole playlist of Kratos vs. Kratos videos if you want to check those out. But anyway, in conclusion, I hope that they add the older games to Steam, and if they do remake or remaster it, I wish them the best. I hope you enjoyed, have a Jesus blessed day, and I will see you in the next one.